Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the Conservative member of the European Parliament, David Campbell Bannerman, who's co-chairman of Conservatives for Britain campaign. I asked him what he thought of David Cameron's efforts to secure a temporary ban on in-work benefits for EU migrants.
I'm sorry, I think the emergency brake proposal, as it's called, is complete nonsense. We would have to prove to the EU that our public services in crisis, GPs, hospitals, schools, and then if we're lucky, they'll hold a vote on it, and you need a majority vote. I mean, that's not control of your own country, that's handing control to another country called Europe. So
if David Cameron is going to go back and say, not good enough, I want more, you sound as if you don't have much faith in that.
No, I think I'm afraid it's turned into a sham, the whole renegotiation process. There's nothing of real substance. It's very trivial, a lot of this. The British people want control back of their borders, particularly economic control, democratic control, and this is not satisfying that need, and I think they will vote to leave.
You describe it as a sham. Perhaps a politer word would be theatre. Are you expecting a bit more of this? I mean, I hope I'm not being excessively cynical, but one might expect various refusals on either side, an emergency summit and a deal at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Well, Harold Wilson, 1975, had a very cynical exercise, quite similar, which fooled the British people in 75. It was only the Highlands Islands in Scotland that actually voted not to join the EEC then. And in Scotland, I think, actually is pretty Eurosceptic in parts. You're seeing Jim Sellers coming out, you're seeing Gordon Wilson coming out, and of course the SNP used to be in favour of leaving the EU before '92.
That's not what the polls show. The polls show up here there's a fairly substantial majority in favour of staying in the EU.
Yes, I accept that, but we haven't really had a proper debate yet. We have to see what this package brings out of Brussels. I'm not confident, I'm afraid. We wanted to see fundamental change. This isn't fundamental change. I think it'll be a lot closer than people think. As we know in Scotland, we know in the general election, polls don't actually give the right answer often.
Okay. But you see, one of the criticisms of your position is people will say, well, people like you will never change your mind. It doesn't matter what David Cameron does. He could come back with a multi-billion-pound gift from Germany and you'd still say, no, let's leave the European Union.
Well, it would be our money, I think. Britain is the second largest contributor to the EU. And a lot of the money that goes in regional grants to Scotland comes from the UK, with a big hole in it, taken out in Brussels and sent back again.
But my point stands. It doesn't matter what David Cameron does. You will always say, oh, it's not good enough.
Well, we were looking at fundamental change, and this isn't fundamental change, I'm afraid. I mean, if you actually offered fundamental change to the British people, they may well vote to stay in. But the only fundamental change we're going to get is if we leave the EU. It sounds dramatic. It isn't. We're the largest single customer of the rest of the EU. I'm on the Trade Committee. I know about these trade deals. We would get an excellent trade deal.
Does it concern you? You presumably consider yourself a Conservative and a Unionist, that should there be this scenario, which looks not impossible, that Scotland votes to stay in, the UK votes to leave the European Union, that will bring pressure for another referendum and possibly the breakup of the United Kingdom?
I just don't buy the arguments at all. It's totally illogical. If you think about it, if the UK leaves the EU, and then Scotland votes to stay outside of both the EU and the UK for years. The British Prime Minister said there's a very, very long queue to join the EU. He's right. You know, you've got Serbia, Turkey, Albania. Scotland will be behind that, and I think that would be a disaster for Scotland. And also, the oil price is 1/3 of what the S&P
White Paper that's an argument,
had.
But the very least one could say is that should this scenario come to pass, it will make the United Kingdom look much less stable than it looks at the moment.
No, I think it would be more stable because I think Scotland would be less able to break away or less willing to break away. I mean, if you think about it, the other thing is we could devolve powers now held by the EU, not by Westminster, but by the EU, back to Scotland. Fishing, farming, parts of trade, the Scottish Whisky Association is very active on that. Tourism, energy and the environment, a lot of the powers are with the EU, not Westminster. And I think, you know, the Scottish people would feel more in charge, more independent if we got Brexit.